Turkey in a dismal 154th spot on the World Press Freedom Index.
Joining us to continue our discussion about the treatment of journalists around the world is our current panel. Also joining us for this particular segment is today's Zaman columnist Arzu Kaya Uranli. And we're also joined by Dan Friedheim. He's a foreign policy expert. We have a full panel here, so let's discuss what's going on in Turkey. We touched briefly in the last segment on what has changed with regard to the political unrest there, but it has trickled down clearly into what is happening in the world of journalism and news gathering there. And you're on the front line, so what are you seeing?
Every day we hear bad news from Turkey, and everybody is under attack. To me, it seems everybody is a potential terrorist right now, because one threat can be a reason for you to detain. Last week we heard 2 journalists were detained, and they're...
Okay, let me hold you right there because we're having a problem with your microphone, and go to Jackie if we can. And again, we touched on the situation, what's happening there. Does it give you pause to ask a question when you're in that environment?
Well, of course it does. I mean, and not only asking a question, but look at what the current administration has done. It's really infiltrated into all aspects of journalism in the country of Turkey. People do not want to advertise on certain broadcasting facilities. Why? You know, because they'll get flack from what's going on. Journalists there have been jailed. Erdogan has been going after not only journalists, but anybody in the media, musicians. He went after some high school students and tried to sue them. I mean, there's a real sense of repression now in the country. Well,
Dan, does that mean that, you know, the real journalists can migrate into social media and continue to do what they're doing and hopefully not get caught because they're not on the front lines?
Oh, I don't know if a journalist feels safe hiding on social media, right?
Well, would it be more difficult
for a repressive government to track you on social media too, right?
But you're not physically out there with a microphone hanging out there twisting in the wind, as opposed you might be in a basement somewhere, which you can quickly move somewhere else and keep moving.
Right. No, but you can see how that kind of climate of even having to think about whether it's safe for you to go out and report, that's just one measure of how Turkey's democracy is definitely eroding.
Let's go back to you for a moment. Do you worry now what you might ask and can ask? I mean, it must be a chilling effect to know that the next question could get you in trouble.
That's true. I mean, here in I've been here living in the United States for more than 18 years, and I've been actively working as a journalist. And recently, the most common question I heard from my friends, is it okay to go back to Turkey? Are you safe? Are you in some certain list? You know, everybody is nervous, and even some friends who've been visiting Turkey, you know, now asking me if they are safe if they go. Wow. So it's kind of alarming in many ways. And I was just mentioning 2 different incidents happened last week. 2 journalists were arrested, and their computers and cell phones were seized because of their tweets. Yeah. And also another gentleman who lives in Washington, D.C. and wrote a piece about Davutoğlu. And because Davutoğlu didn't like the tone of the article, sued him. And he is now a candidate from opposition party for the coming election. So apparently it seems whatever you do against AKP or Erdogan or someone from AKP, you are under risk.
All right, let's go to Washington and Courtney Radsch. It's not only the reporters that are being attacked, but also there was a raid at the offices of the Today's Zaman last week, and that must concern you as well, that they're actually going into the newsrooms and taking some of the management out.
It's deeply concerning whenever media organizations are targeted. I mean, the fact is that when you attack journalists or you attack media organizations themselves, you're not only attacking those individuals and undermining their basic human rights, you're eroding the public's right to information and the public's right to know. And so that has broad implications for, a democracy. And I think that what we see in Turkey is this broad erosion of basic democratic principles around a free press and around freedom of expression more broadly, as we've seen with the new internet law that's been passed, and the continual crackdowns, closures of social media outlets, attacks on the press, and really attempts to intimidate. And when you attack an organization like Today's Zaman, you send a broad signal to the rest of the press corps: be careful, or we're going to come after you too. So it has a broader censorial impact that might lead to self-censorship.
Danica Radisic in Serbia, are you watching what's happening in Turkey as well as Hungary, close by, to see what's going on? And are you watching in concern when you see stuff like that?
Absolutely. In fact, a lot of similar things have been happening here, and it's not just journalists anymore. Bloggers get hit. It's usually DDoS attacks or something similar. They receive phone calls and warnings. There's been intimidation of just civilians using social media, so the whole social media question is a little more complicated. Now, Turkey is a much larger market than most of the other countries in the region, and it is quite different. But yes, we're watching closely because we know our governments are watching closely and that they're taking their lead from Turkey. And yes, it's deeply concerning to us.
Arzu Uranli, you work for the Today's Zaman, and it is your editor-in-chief who was singled out. You're in the newsroom and something like this happens. It must send, as they mentioned a moment ago, a message to every reporter there that no one is safe.
That's so true.
Were you there when it happened?
Not physically in Turkey, but my heart was there because we've been expecting that. We didn't know when.
Did you get emails and texts?
Yes.
And what were your colleagues saying?
They were so nervous. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, one of the crew member was here. I was just escorting her, and we were meeting with different media organizations, Sevgi Akarçeşme, and she explained how terrified they were because there is no definite explanation what was the
Well, I was going to
crime.
ask you, what are the allegations exactly against him?
That is so funny. It's about the claim is being a member of terrorist organization. But there is no base for that.
So it was, in your mind at least, it was trumped up. It was made up.
Well, they have been using that excuse,
Yes.
and that's what they have been slapping on the journalists who they're throwing in jail.
And it's a blanket, as journalists we know, or those in journalism, we know that that's the blanket excuse.
Yeah.
They make something up, try to connect your name to it. Dan, you...
That's actually quite common.
I'm sorry, just hold on the Skype or connection here for just a moment. Mm-hmm. How does this change? I mean, somewhere down the road, Turkey, which was a peaceful and really a quiet nation for so many years, Erdogan will move on eventually. Does this go back to the way it used to be as a foreign policy expert? Do you see that?
I just wanted to point out, obviously it means Turkey's not turning further to Europe, right? And all the EU talk is pretty much behind it.
And what you're mentioning
it has
is
implications for the economy.
There was a very real possibility that Turkey would become a part of the European Union, which now essentially is on hold.
Yeah. So that's on hold, and it was very interesting in Washington recently. I got to hear a report the World Bank presented, pointing out the Turkish economy, which has been performing really well, almost like those famous BRICS economies, Brazil, Russia, China, has started to slow down. And what the World Bank blames is political factors like rule of law and fair regulation, and they point the finger very specifically at political favoritism and manipulation.
So there are ramifications.
So I think
all
it
of
has, even economic implications.
What about the harassment of the STV? That must have sent chills down your spine as well.
Right. This is also so upsetting because of a TV series, and there is a religious group covering in that series, and the government doesn't like it. They delay if the scenario goes, and they sue you for that. This is what happens right now.
So they have the ability to do that, and they are doing that, which also sends a message that be careful what you write, be careful what you broadcast.
Can you imagine if that happened in the United States?
Well, you know, we discussed this in the green room earlier, but I think it was the second President Bush who established these free press zones or free speech zones. And sometimes when you have a protest in the United States, you're penned in. When I was a reporter in New York City, we were penned in sometimes 2 blocks away from the action, and we were told to stay there. So in a certain way, that has also permeated journalism in the United States.
Well, that's going to be a pull, you know, a pull and push over time, those energies back and forth. Do we allow journalists to have access to this information, or do we bring
free access?
Right, free access.
Exactly. We used to be able to roam around, and now we're in these pens, and they're essentially saying stay there like cattle until we get back to you.
Right, but in the United States,
the problem is actually much broader.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Courtney, I was going to ask you next. Go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, of course it's problematic if you're covering a live event and you're off penned up, but there are many other issues happening in the United States in terms of access, in terms of restricting the ability of government officials to speak with the press. I don't know if you've heard of the Insider Threat Program, but it basically asks people in the government to report on unauthorized access that their colleagues have with the press. The Obama administration has used the Espionage Act more than twice as much as any and all presidents combined in history to crack down on whistleblowers who have, you know, revealed things to the press that are of incredible public interest. And I would go back to this issue of using, you know, terrorism as an excuse to arrest or clamp down on journalists. And that really, we saw an uptick after 9/11 and the terrorism rhetoric. And I think that what we're going to see also now in the wake of Charlie Hebdo and with the rise of ISIS and the whole Countering Violent Extremism initiative is this concern about the use of trumped up terrorism charges to clamp down on legitimate dissent or criticism.
Okay, let's go to Serbia now. And Danica, we read as well that a prominent Turkish journalist and anchorwoman was actually detained for a tweet she made in which she called on citizens not to forget the name of a judge who dropped a corruption probe against Erdogan. You know, that's another example, don't you think, where even a tweet is enough to do it?
Yes, absolutely. And we've had instances of this happening in Serbia as well. Again, Hungary, Serbia, Macedonia, they're all taking the lead, or they're taking a lead from each other. I don't know who's taking the lead from whom anymore. But yes, we've had journalists and civilians here brought in for questioning just because of tweets, especially for criticism of the government. This is more of a scare tactic, which doesn't excuse it in any way or make it any better. So these people are usually, and journalists are usually not detained for longer periods of time. You know, things don't happen to them, but it's a scare tactic. And of course, it makes people think twice about what they're going to tweet again. And I'd just like to take a moment to tie into what everyone else already mentioned. And that is that these trumped up terrorism charges, and often here what's used is also espionage charges. This dates back to the 60s and the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. These excuses were used here all the time. The thing that I believe is different is that people had better lives. You know, people used to live better. And as someone mentioned, the Turkish economy, which saw massive growth over several years, has been slowing down recently. People are unsatisfied. So suddenly these governments in our entire region have more people complaining, more journalists having more issues to write about, and you know, it's getting harder to clamp down on them, so they have to be more aggressive about it.
All right, well, we thank you very much.
Yeah,
Let me give you the last word.
Okay, I mean, I would like to underline something. Hidayet Karaca was detained and he's still in prison just because...
You're talking about the anchorwoman?
No, not the anchorwoman. I'm talking about the gentleman from STV. He was put in a jail just because a fictional scenario. This is something so serious. I mean, we are not talking about approaching the news or news sources. This is fictional scenario, and he's still in there, and there are lots of complaints and condemnation all over the world, And nothing
he's still
happened.
There. It really is chilling. As a journalist, it worries me, and it should worry everybody, because without free press, there's no information. We thank you very much. We had a full house here, all five of you. I appreciate your time. Coming up, the re-election of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and what it means to the Middle East, and of course those delicate negotiations ongoing between the U.S. and Iran.